Hi, I'm Jennifer Allen, reporting for RSNA News. I'm talking with Dr. Lil Sonas, Program Director for the Diagnostic Radiology and Molecular Imaging Residency Programs at Johns Hopkins. We're talking about the pivot in education that occurred because of COVID-19 and how it has affected radiology residents. Thank you, Dr. Solness, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
First off, what type of virtual learning resources have been provided by Johns Hopkins for the trainees?
We have always provided anatomy resources online, QBanks, which the residents always take advantage of. And interestingly enough, we had started talking about using Zoom in our educational curriculum prior to the pandemic. But it was kind of a thing we were going to think about and slowly adopt. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, we adopted that immediately. And then we've also begun using Microsoft Teams now. So we've pivoted from an educational resource that the resident interacts with on an individual basis usually to something that we use as a group together.
So for early radiology residents, how has the disruption affected their education?
It certainly has affected them. One of the major things that happened, and I think it happened across the country, is that our volumes dropped significantly. So there wasn't this wealth of teaching cases to teach them day to day. And in addition, we weren't able to sit next to them and teach them in person, which is how we traditionally had done it. So it certainly affected them in the short run. We did a few things to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on them. We created virtual resources, which we didn't have before. And essentially what we did, I have an amazing associate program director who took, Dr. Tony Lin, who took 3-year-old cases, and we just simulated the experience for them at home that they would have had on site. And then we would review those cases with them.
So how different do you think radiology education will look moving forward?
It's interesting. There's definitely a silver lining in all of this. And I think we will have a more of a hybrid, certainly at Johns Hopkins, we will have a more hybrid educational program. And that is, we'll certainly incorporate a lot of the technology that we've had to quickly adopt into our teaching curriculum. And I think what happens is that we are actually able to reach all types of learners. So we have learners that like to sit in lectures, we have learners who like to read books, and then we have learners who like to learn off the computer and interact with the screen. And so we'll certainly have a hybrid program now. We're evolving at the moment of what that will look like, but it will be very different than it was, let's say, at the end of 2019.
What, if any, will be the long-term impact of this disruption on radiology trainees?
So I think in the short term, there certainly was an impact on them, but in the long term, there will be minimal. Our trainees are smart, they're motivated, they want to learn radiology. One of the hardest things probably to compensate for is procedural experience. And what we've done is we will look at their schedules going forward and make sure that we fill in the gaps that they had during that pandemic.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Solness, for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
For updates and the latest scientific research, guidelines, and consensus statements about COVID-19, visit rsna.org/COVID-19. And as always, you can find more radiology news at rsna.org/news.